Rachel, will you go out with me?
You're kidding, right?
Will you? Please.
No, Chug.
Disturbing Behavior is a 1998 American teen science fiction psychological horror film directed by David Nutter, starring James Marsden, Katie Holmes, Nick Stahl, Bruce Greenwood, William Sadler, and many more. Let's take a quick look.
Come sit down. This is Kathy.
Hey.
Lorna. Chug. You know Robbie. And Dickie. Steven's new to the Bay from Chicago.
You hate it here, don't you?
She's different. The kids are...
Strange.
Hello. Hey.
It's like they're always smiling. They're always happy. Kelly Connor said she saw Andy Efkin bite the head off a kitten in a fit of rage.
They're brainwashed, lobotomized, programmed. They used to be my friends.
Gavin thinks some sinister force is taking over the Cradle Bay meatheads.
A sinister force?
Now, with every successive kid, we are getting closer and closer to perfection. All in favor?
I can't go home. When I get there, they're waiting for me. Don't leave me alone like this! I'm a friend of Gavin's. Is he around?
Gavin's a good boy now.
Science is God.
It's not what you think.
I got a couple tiny glitches to iron out.
Will you go out with me?
No.
Why not?
Wrong. Bad.
It's not bad, it's normal.
Who's gonna believe you, huh? Your parents?
You signed me up for the program?
It's a new kind of cool.
Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. No one to trust.
We want what's best for you.
What about what I want?
I'm not sick, but I'm not well. And I'm so high. 'Cause I'm in hell. Wow.
Disturbing behavior.
Happy New Year and welcome back to the Cult of Films. That's right, I told you that I was going to be bringing you this episode eventually, and here it is, one of my favorite cult films from the 90s, and that is David Nutter's Disturbing Behavior. And not saying that this is one of the best films ever made. Wasn't even considered a great film by many, except for this guy. I think this film came out in the exact year. This is my freshman year of high school. I was going through some changes in life, as most young teens do, and I was very impressionable with these types of films. This was the era of your Cruel Intentions and your teen thrillers, your slasher films like, Scream wasn't too far in front of this, and then you had, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and this was kind of at the tail end of that, but also at the beginning, at the very genesis of some of these actors' meteoric rises, like young Katie Holmes, who was just kind of exploding onto the scene with Dawson's Creek, and James Marsden, that would go on to play characters in huge movies like The Notebook and Cyclops in the X-Men franchise. As far as how did this movie fare? Well, in the box office, it had a budget of $15 million. It made 17.5, so breaking even in Hollywood, even in 1998, is not where you want to be, and there's some reasons for this. Even 22 years later from when this film first debuted on the screen, do I still hold a special place for it, because it's not only like, I not only loved what we got on the screen, even though it was kind of a complete mess, and it felt very disjointed, and even back then I always kind of knew, I always kind of felt that as well. But for the potential that this film could have been, And to get the genesis of that, we have to start with the film's director, David Nutter. Now, David Nutter would go on to have great success directing television, like episodes of The Flash, and most importantly, Game of Thrones, and most famously, the Red Wedding episode. That still haunts most people's nightmares. But David Nutter was also the director-producer of The X-Files, and Disturbing Behavior definitely feels like a relative to The X-Files, for sure, just in more of a, teen capacity. And not just because of David Nutter, but the music was composed by Mark Snow. This was the classic case of studio meddling, unfortunately, and David Nutter had a certain vision for this, and he put it out to the test audiences. Quite a great response from those test audiences, but the studio, being the studios, they kind of stepped in and said, well, this is too long, this part's too boring, let's try to trim it up a little bit. Those teenagers, they don't have the proper attention span to sit through a smart psychological thriller. That was my impression of old businessmen trying to overstep into a creative's vision, and that's exactly what happened here, because that couldn't have been further from the truth. After cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts, they even cut it down too much to 83 minutes, not even a 90-minute feature runtime, and what you got is a lot of the connective tissue and a lot of the soul ripped out of this feature. So first off, what is Disturbing Behavior about? Well, it all centers around Stephen Clark, who is probably a senior. I mean, he's a 32-year-old senior, played by James Marsden. Not really, but back in the 90s, they always cast these like mid to late 20s, early 30s, and trying to pass them off as teens. But he and his sister move into the town of Cradle Bay in the Puget Sound area in Washington State, which is now where I preside, and they, everything looks very picturesque as it does, and they're moving for reasons to get away from a troubled past. Well, because Steve has not only a younger sister, but he had a older brother named Alan, played by Ethan Embry, only seen in flashbacks, and he committed suicide. That was another thing that got pulled out of the cut, of the Nutter cut, well, the nut cut, we'll call it, that unfortunately no one got to see, and so what we're left with is there's just like some flashback images, kind of told through like seen through like a VHS with a VHS looking filter on it. It's kind of a cool stylistic choice. It makes it a little frantic, where it's just like jump cuts. His parents are attempting to just let this family kind of heal and start over new in this new environment, where young Steve gets introduced to the resident stoner and his buddy UV, and that's Gavin Strick, played by Nick Stahl.
And you got kids like me and UV here. Names like are Metal Heavy, Marlboro Slight. Music choice, Harvester of Sorrow, Language of the Mad. Drug of choice, what do you got? Freaks all week.
Nick Stahl is kind of the kid that ditches to go smoke cigarettes or anything else that you might put in papers, whatever. Back then it was illegal. Now you could just go to a pot store like at 7-Eleven. Just to take a step back, that's how the movie kind of opens up, is Gavin on one of his kind of stoner walks with his dog. He sees two teenagers on like a makeout hill. He's kind of creeping on them. He's got nothing else to do, and that turns very nefarious, where it looks like one of his friends, the female, her body's kind of dragged out of the car just when he thinks, oh god, this is the perfect time for the police to show up, but the cop actually also kind of covers up for the school jock. And these school jocks are called the Blue Ribbons, and the Blue Ribbons are essentially this film's version of the Stepford Wives. It's like the faculty meets the Stepford Wives. Psychologist Dr. Edward Caldecott starts taking these teens, these kind of troubled youth, and quote unquote, there's really nothing, they're just kids being kids, and kind of takes them in, Clockwork Orange style, inserts little like microchips into their eyes. He doesn't count on the overload of hormones that are constantly flowing through teenagers' bodies and veins. And every time, as he says, every time one of these kids gets a hard on, they go out and beat someone with it. Overload of hormones when they're sexually aroused kind of malfunctions this chip and turns them into raging lunatics, where it also, I guess, gives them superhuman strength. At one point you see this character Chug, who's like the meathead of the Blue Ribbons, like literally throw this other person like across the like a grocery store. So not only or even one of them like snap someone's neck with like little to no force. I guess it's just about angles. I mean, that's how chiropractors make a good living, I guess, but I digress. So it not only turns them into murderous monsters, but it also gives them super strength and powers, I guess. Kind of the entire oversweeping plot of the film. It's basically, Gavin trying to tell his friends, what's going on because he witnessed this horrible murder, and everyone else being super skeptical, even though, like, one day this kid named Dickie, who's like this like crazy motorhead, he's like a parody of like a motor jock, I don't know, where one day he's getting in a fight with a blue ribbon, he's flipping off the teacher, and then the next day he's smashing his own like Mustang or whatever, because they take. So Steve's starting to be like, yeah, this is weird, like I'm starting to see signs, but Gavin is so paranoid about it, and everyone just attributes it to him just partaking a little bit too much. We get introduced to the character played by Katie Holmes, that is Rachel. What a razor character she is. Confession time. Back in probably when Dawson's Creek started, I used to have a Katie Holmes shrine, we'll call it. A few pictures, completely healthy, up on my wall. Everyone did, right? I had a big thing for Katie Holmes. And this movie, especially her intro scene, didn't help that obsession. Another huge character in this film that also receive a truncated role, which is very upsetting because his whole inclusion is very important to the overall plot, and that is the character that William Sadler played. If you all remember Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, he played the Grim Reaper. He plays Dorian Newberry, who is kind of the village idiot, or is he? He is kind of like the Quasimodo character. He's just like walking around the school basement looking for rats, but he's also developing like sound waves and stuff to kind of mess with these the Blue Ribbons chips, because at one point, Chug is confronting Rachel, Katie Holmes' character, and it looks like it's gonna turn real bad, and then that's when this device goes off, the rat deterrent, sonic device, and that's when Mr. Newberry finds out that his device not only works on the rats but also works on the Blue Ribbons, which again, kind of like this big act that he plays, that he's, at one point he says,
"You'd be surprised how interesting people become when they think you're really stupid."
I wish his character was fleshed out a little bit more, which it was in the cut scenes that you didn't get in the nut cut, and it even describes the exact moments that set this entire thing by Caldecott in motion, where there's this like drunk driving scenario, and kids were killed, and that's why school psychologist takes the natural law into his own hands and starts brainwashing these kids.
Why didn't you make like a tree and leave?
Clever girl.
The big aha moment is when it's finally revealed that Gavin is now transformed into a Blue Ribbon. It's just like, if this kid could straighten out overnight, now there's something wrong. So, and then it just kind of goes into thriller mode, where a little less sci-fi, more thriller, of just like Steve and Rachel just trying to escape the island, basically, because everyone's kind of in on it, where even Rachel and Steve's parents are they kind of sell them out, and they put them in the program. So that's and then it just kind of wraps up. You know, they get confronted. You know, there's a couple of fight scenes. It's basically just Steve getting his ass kicked for most of the movie by all the blue ribbons.
Who's your dad, huh?
Let's go, Chuck.
I always thought the ending was quite funny. Instead of trying to, you know, save these kids, or, you know, because they are just kids, they're like 16-year-olds. Well, you know, Mr. Newberry just kind of loads them up all on his car, and he drives off a cliff, and that's it. And one of them escapes. That one of them being Gavin, to, I guess, continue on the Caldecott way because Gavin sat in on the science to create these chips, or anything like. I'm not too sure, especially because it shows he's in like LA or something, like a South Central, which looks like that's where I'm reporting from right now, with my whole getup. And again, this was all kind of cleared up and a little bit more neat, more connection with Steve and his parents, because with what we're left with in the actual cinematic runtime, his parents just kind of come off as just very cold and uncaring about what Steve has gone through, losing his brother and trying to, you know, start over again in this new environment with all this crazy shit going on. Just ripped a lot of the heart out of Disturbing Behavior, and that's pretty sad, because there is some great like bones here. There's some good things even in the cinematic runtime where you could tell it's like a great movie until it's not, and then it starts to become one again, and then it cuts away real quick, and you're just left with just like this feeling of unsatisfaction, because even without even knowing there's deleted scenes or a nut cut, then you're just like, this just feels unfinished, and it feels rushed, and this is the stereotypical studio meddling with creators, even with the backup of good feedback, which is so maddening. It's just sad to think of how much this stuff happens in Hollywood, where, you know, the next time you see a bad sci-fi or a thriller or even a horror movie, think about it. Maybe is it just the overall thing bad, or is it because there's too many fingers in the pot of mashed potatoes? So that's why I always give a little bit more leniency to than the face value of just like, oh, this is bad, and it's because of the writer director. It's probably because of the filmmakers also. It was written by Scott Rosenberg, who did like Highway and Gone in 60 Seconds. Was Disturbing Behavior a big failure? Critically, yeah, and financially, kind of. But does it deserve a watch? Absolutely, it does. It has some great scenes of tension, like the whole insane asylum scene with Katie Holmes and James Marsden breaking in to find Caldecott's daughter. That, you know, it just shows how nefarious this character really is. That if he lobotomizes his own kid, you know, no one's safe, basically. And of course, the greatest song of the 90s from one of the greatest bands that no one talks about ever is in the movie, and that is when they're running away from the insane asylum being chased. Harvey Danger, Flagpole Sitta. Mwah. You know what? Story time. I was living in Vegas when this movie came out, and right after this, and even during the trailers, they would play the Flagpole Sitta over and over and over again. So I went to my local Tower Records store, and I bought the Disturbing Behavior soundtrack because I wanted to hear whoever this was. You know, you'd see Flagpole Sitta sometimes on MTV when they played music videos, but I was obsessed with this song. I go home, I pop it in. I am very pleasantly surprised by the overall soundtrack of Discerning Behavior because it is fantastic. It is a 90s who's who of just like alternative rock, like B-sides. It's actually pretty fantastic. But lo and behold, to my dismay, no Flagpole Sitta by Harvey Danger. But the good thing that came of that is that it forced me to go out and buy Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone from Harvey Danger, and it's still, to this very day, one of my favorite albums of all time. Also Washington-based. So that is my long-awaited, at least by me, review of Discerned Behavior, directed by David Nutter. I mean, think about the talent that was in this film, back in 1998, and these actors, most of them, would go on to do great things. Bruce Greenwood has been in like everything, and of course, Katie Holmes, her career kind of shot to and then kind of fell off, and then, like I said, James Marsden's always been working. He's turned out pretty great. Were their performances great in this? Nah. The dialogue wasn't 100% great, but it was, old guys probably writing for teenagers, and that never comes off as authentic as it should be.
A sinister force?
Evil. Nowhere to turn, no one to trust, altogether ooky.
Failed to be a bimmy bitch, Rachel.
Fail to be a pucker-ass Gav.
But, again, I digress. Go check out Discerning Behavior if you haven't. Even if you have, go watch it again. Is it as good or as bad as you remember? Leave in the comments downstairs. Click that thumbs up button. Thank you so much for joining me for another Cult of Films. It has been far too long. If you want to talk more movies or magic with me, you can on Twitter at OrzovDone. You can support this channel by becoming a patron of They Said We Said. And if you want to listen to this in podcast form only, you could do so on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, all the other podcasting sites. So until next time.
Sounds razor.